All right, today we're going to talk about what is a misfire, what can cause a misfire, and how can you diagnose a misfire. And this will apply to any combustion engine, okay? Now, I'm not an artist, so don't make fun of me, but this is about as best as I can do. Any misfire on any motor, literally any combustion engine, 2-stroke, 4-stroke, doesn't matter. This is going to be an issue with either fuel, spark, or compression. Those are the three things that you need to make a combustion engine run. Now, this is more of a 4-stroke motor that you're going to see in a car, and this is explaining exactly how a combustion cycle works and where your misfire could be coming from, okay? So this is if you pull a code that your engine code through after your car had a rough idle or wasn't running right or had a rough run to it, and you can feel it shaking, and it throws a misfire code. It could be bad gas, meaning, you know, you got water in your gas. But if you clear that code and then rerun it and it does the same thing and it throws a misfire code in the same cylinder, it's not bad gas, and water removal is not going to help. That basically means that we can start with the issues that are most common in most vehicles. As they get older, your spark plugs and your ignition coils can go bad, right? So in my drawing here, you're going to see my ignition coil and my spark plug. It can also be an issue with fuel, meaning maybe your fuel injector is dirty. So if you ran a fuel injector cleaner in your car every 10,000 miles or so, this is very unlikely. Fuel injectors tend to last a really long time. Or maybe your fuel pump went bad, but that would basically cause the engine to not start. It wouldn't give you a misfire. So then the last issue is the one that everybody fears and doesn't want to deal with, and that's if you lose compression. And we can talk about where all you lose compression. So let's just first explain a combustion cycle for a typical engine. I guess I could put a little line here and say this is about where the head gasket would be, and we'll talk about that. So let's go over here. All right. So this is your typical engine setup, all right? This is an ignition coil having a wire come from the motor. This is going to be your spark plug. This is your combustion chamber or your cylinder. This is the piston. Piston travels up and down. These are your piston rings that make a tight seal, and the oil helps with that. And then you have your air intake and fuel intake valves that let air and fuel combustion mixture in. And then these are your exhaust valves that let it out. So how this works is this piston will come down, fuel and air will come in through these valves. They open up and close up with your rockers from your camshaft, basically. That's gonna be part of your head. And then when this piston starts coming back up, it compresses that air and that gas into a gas mixture. And then you get an electrical current from the motor because of your timing belt, and it knows when it's up there, and it sends current through the ignition coil into the spark plug, creates a spark. Big explosion pushes the piston down, and then these exhaust ports open up and allow that exhaust out of the motor, okay? So again, fuel, if the fuel injector's bad, that can cause a misfire, but it's less likely. The easiest thing to start with testing is your spark plug and your ignition coil. They're the easiest thing to pull. If you take your ignition coil out and you take your spark plug out and the spark plug's wet and it smells like gas, that means that you're probably getting fuel in there. It's not an issue, but it's not exploding, okay? So then look at your spark plug. Does it have a bunch of carbon buildup here on the tip? If it does, take a wire brush to it, clean it all up, put it back in, try it again. If that doesn't work, I have a video on how to test the spark plug. Please look at that video on how to test a spark plug. That'll help. If the spark plug looks great, it's just wet, it's not igniting, but it doesn't look like it's got bad carbon buildup, now it could be your ignition coil. I also have a video on how to test an ignition coil. Check that out. That'll give you advice on how to test your ignition coil. The worst case scenario is that you lose compression. That requires an engine to be rebuilt in some way or another. And this is all the different areas that you can lose compression, okay? So you could either have a stuck fuel or air intake valve, meaning that there's a passageway for air to just come right out when this piston comes up. Because when this piston comes up, both of these sets of valves are supposed to be closed. And if they're not, it's just letting air out. No issue whatsoever. And if it's a big leak, you're gonna almost lose all compression with that valve being open. The other option is that your exhaust valves might be stuck open or have a ton of carbon buildup and are leaking. And again, if they're stuck open big time, this will again lead to almost no compression, because when that's coming up, the air is just coming out right away. No slow leak, okay? The more common in old engines or engines that don't have good oil changes or got overheated a couple times is that these piston rings go bad. And these piston rings are thin slices of metal that go all the way around the piston, and they basically run on the inside of this cylinder wall. And they're a tight seal, and they're cooled by oil, and then it gives a really tight seal in here and gets you compression. So if you watch my video on compression testing and you get a compression test that's like 80 to 90 PSI, maybe even 75 PSI, but all the other cylinders are 120, 130, 150, it's probably a piston ring, I'll be honest with you. That's the more common thing. And what that is that these piston rings have just been wore out, and the cylinder wall got etched, meaning it got burnt, and now the piston rings aren't getting a good seal, and you're losing just enough compression to cause no spark. No combustion whenever that spark goes off. The other option is that you blew a head gasket. So this is your heads, meaning this whole piece comes off the motor, and then this is your cylinder. And there's a gasket in here, typically made of metal, and that gasket is a tight seal with bolts that come through here. If your engine got significantly overheated, you can blow a head gasket, and that will lead to essentially no compression either. Your other option is maybe you had really bad issue and you blew out this entire spark plug. So when you go to remove the spark plug, it's just like loose in there and there's metal shards. That's like the worst case scenario too. That means you need a whole new head repaired. But the most common is burnt piston rings, bad valve seats, or they're stuck open, or you blew a head gasket. And again, I can test compression, and I show you guys a video how to test that. So quick summary, you need fuel, spark, and compression to run a combustion motor. It's going to consist of your ignition coil and your spark. For the spark, the electrical current from the motor is usually not an issue. Your fuel intake and your exhaust output valves for combustion, and your piston rings for combustion, and your head gasket for combustion. And your fuel injectors are usually not an issue, but they could be. All right, hopefully this really helps explain how this all works, and then you can always use my other videos to test each component. Like and subscribe.